Well, friends, welcome back to the Space for Faith podcast. It is good to have you with us today, and I'm excited for our conversation that we get to be a part of today with Jayne Sugg. And Jayne is a musical artist and has a new album that has come out. And so I'm excited for us to get to chat a little bit about that. And so Jayne is coming in here from New York City. Welcome to the Space for Faith podcast, Jayne.
Thank you for having me, Mike, all the way over in California.
Yeah, so fun. And we were just chatting before we started recording that we've got a bunch of mutual friends. You are a part of what's happening out with the Good Shepherd Church out there
Mhm.
in New York that a lot of our listeners are probably familiar with. I'm super curious. Well, first, I wanted to say I got to share this with you, but I want to share it with everyone else too. Allison and I, we attended Good Shepherd online during the early days of COVID, especially, and it was real special and meaningful for us. And you were often one of the singers that were a part of that. And so when I was out this past summer out in New York, I got to go to Good Shepherd on a Sunday, and you were singing that Sunday, and it was like celebrity sighting for me, which was so fun to, I was so glad. I was like, oh, I hope Jayne is one of the people leading worship today.
That's so special. That really means a lot. And I think it's funny what like I was sharing with you what happens when you see faces on screens often enough. And I mean, all we had was each other. Like those Sundays where we would just watch those services together. I saw myself too. That was just funny.
Yeah, that's so
But
weird.
really meaningful, like the wine and the bread that we had in the house to take communion, like all of us digitally. It's cool to know that we were sharing that space together a long time ago, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, how did you end up? Because this is how we got connected through some mutual friends at Good Shepherd. Like, how did you end up at Good Shepherd? How'd you end up being a part of the worship team there and the music collective there? What did that journey look like for you?
It's such a good question, because it's I find it to be when I say it out loud, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that." It just sort of feels like I've always been at Good Shepherd. Um, it's been years now, and it was before the pandemic when I began, uh, just, like, communing at the church, and it was early in my, like, career in New York, my living here in New York City. My husband and I moved here in 2017. We'd only been married a year, and now we've been married, the bulk of our time here in the city. But um just like for brief background, we're from New Mexico and we're really, really proud New Mexicans. And we love home. Our parents are still like back in New Mexico and we visit often, but it's a pretty slow pace. And we were also both working at an evangelical, more charismatic church in our 20s, married early. And I think we were both just kind of like, if we stay here, we will have a mortgage and children like in the blink of an eye, and will not have adventured. And that was a priority for us. And so we had our eyes on New York, moved to New York, but I had already begun, which I know we'll get into, a deconstructive process. And I didn't really know it yet. I just knew that like my journal entries and my prayer and like just how I was approaching things was shifting slowly. But we still found ourselves at Hillsong, New York for 1 year.
Okay.
And I had a pretty out of body experience during their women's conference and just kind of knew like it felt like going deaf. I was like, I can't be here anymore. I can't hear anything or feel anything that is meaningful to me in my faith. And, I told my husband and he was like, I guess you're right. That I've been feeling that too. And a friend of mine in New Mexico had referred me to Good Shepherd. At the time, Good Shepherd New York was called Trinity Grace
Yeah.
Tribeca. They were part of a sort of fold that belonged to what is, I believe, Church of the City. Is that right?
Yep.
No.
Yep.
Anyway, we started going there. They held their services in like a school theater, like the theater lecture hall in an elementary school down in Tribeca in Manhattan. And we just we just knew it was the right fit. Um, a few months later, I was like, kind of want to start singing again, which is a curious thing as someone who identified as a worship leader, but then was deconstructing that idea. I still wanted that music in my life. And I found, weeks later, months later, I'm auditioning with David Gunger, who, had the brilliance and he has a family that's like very well known in Christian music. And then I was just on that little like elementary school stage singing worship songs. And then the whole world shut down a year later in 2020. And I found myself in that community of musicians who put their heads together and said, let's make church online and let's make music together, which really kickstarted a whole new space for me and how I understood making music, making worship, working with musicians. And the rest is history. It's been years since, but um, it kind of it went from Hillsong, New York, which is so wild, to the complete like opposite of the spectrum, um, at Good Shepherd, New York, and it's been really they're a really special community to me. I
Mm,
can't imagine having written my album without them. Been
yeah,
very influential.
I love that. I love that. And your album's called Belief is Hard,
Yes,
and it's largely about like your deconstruction, reconstruction journey, right?
that's right.
One of the things that I have learned from friends that write, and I'm curious if this experience is true also for creating music, is that there's some of them that they're working out an idea through their writing, like they need to write in order to work out their idea. And then some of them their writing is a reflection on like they've worked through the stuff and then they use their writing to reflect back on it and to make sense of it.
Mhm.
I don't know. Is that would that be true for you in writing this album? Also, like which of those would it fall into? Was it a part of you like did you need to write music in order to work through your own faith journey or is it more of a reflection of what you experienced?
Yeah, I think a little of both. I think some songs, and I think a songwriter will tell you this, honestly, maybe writers of all mediums, some songs just, like, come to you. I play the piano. It's not my first instrument. My first instrument's my voice. I identify as, like, a vocalist
Okay.
musician, but I use the piano to write. It's just like a little keyboard that's underneath this desk as I speak to you. When I'm troubled and I wanna write and play, sometimes truly a mystical moment. The song just leaves me because it's something I've been thinking here, but I get it out and it's expressed in a way that's like, oh my God, I gotta hit record and let me write that down. There are a couple songs on the album that are that. Other songs came through journal entries of me processing, and I would write it down and be like, that's pretty good, and maybe a star by it or circle it. And then when I knew I'm gonna make some demos today, once I had kind of said to myself, I want to make an album, I went back into my journal and was like, what can I make of this? Can we conceptualize this into a song? So it's a little of both actually. And
Yeah.
I think they're both really effective tools.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. It's interesting to me, like you said earlier, like you wouldn't have fully identified of like saying like using language like deconstruction or whatever, but you're going back through your journals now and you're seeing like you were processing things in some sort of way. What did you notice about your journey as you kind of like looked back and you started to reflect on it in that way?
Oh, I noticed so many things. I think at first I think you're kind of afraid,
Huh.
because You you've understood God one way all this time. That's clearly not working for you anymore. I mean, I shared with you, I'm sitting in a church service that I grew up in church like Hillsong my whole life, just with like a tinge more speaking in tongues and prophecy. But we were big and celebratory and just loud and it was all music oriented. And suddenly I'm in that space and I'm like, did you ever see the Polar Express
Yeah.
with Tom Hanks?
Yeah.
There's that part where he can't hear the bell that Santa gave him because he doesn't have, like, the faith to believe in Santa. I am not comparing any of my faith journey to that, but I felt like in church, in that kind of service, like, I can't hear anything anymore, and I also began to experience that with scripture, with the Bible, um,
It's
my
a
prayer.
very it sounds like it's a very, like, visceral kinda reaction for you, right? Like, is
Yeah,
that right? It's not as much I mean, I would assume that there's, like, head stuff that's going on there, but, like, it's interesting here I don't wanna miss what you wanted to say there, but it's interesting to me that it's, like, a very like, yeah, the way that you're describing it, like, that there's something you're not hearing, there's something that feels like it's missing in some sort of way.
totally. But you're like, I don't get it. As I used to be in this exact same
Hmm.
space and I was able. So it does feel visceral. It almost feels like out of your control, you know? It's like if I could have stayed, if I could have avoided all that pain of rebuilding my belief, I probably would have. It's much more comfortable in what you've grown up in. I think realizing what's happening to me is the first like moment of fear, and then I think what you do with it after, allowing yourself to deconstruct or not, those are decisions you'd have to make, right? Or how do you interpret that deconstruction? And then do you rebuild? So then it's like, I think a lot of my journal entries are like, really back and forth with those spaces. Staying in a spiritual community helped me continue forward. But I think that I often was taking it apart in the right journal and putting it back, taking it apart. Why can't I? How can I?
Yeah.
Uh,
And
yeah.
that's like I told you this before we started recording, but and I don't think this will be a surprise to anyone who's listened to this for any length of time. Like, I I don't fully understand music, and so it's been fun to, like I've listened to your album quite a bit to try and be like, "Okay, how
Sweet.
do I talk about this stuff? How do I had my high school senior daughter, like, listen to some of it, like, "Help me figure this out." I reached out to a
Mhm.
friend of mine who, used to be the head of music at Twitter, and I was like, "How do I
Yeah.
interview a musical artist? Like, I don't even know what to do." Okay.
That's great.
So I give all of this sort of like caveat to say like one of the things that I noticed in like your album, I assume
Mhm.
it's put together in a way like intentionally, right? Like that you've created an intentional kind of flow in it.
Yes.
And um there's a lot of ways that folks will talk about a sort of deconstruction reconstruction journey. The framework that like I've kind of found helpful um I'm gonna forget actually who I first heard it from, so I won't say. Folks won't probably know, but it's orientation, disorientation, reorientation
Ooh,
is
I like that.
kind of like the way I think that it was a theologian, Walter Brueggemann, who kind of
Oh,
framed
yeah.
some things that way.
Okay.
So orientation being like, oh, things make a lot of sense. Like you're uh, the Bible said it and I believe it sort of
Yeah.
thing, like, it's real simple and it makes sense.
Yeah.
Then disorientation, we're all kinda, like, messed up and we're questioning things don't work in the way that they used to, and then reorientation, we're putting things together, but in a way that is, more nuanced, in a way that has more depth, and, as I, like, experienced your album, it kinda felt to me like it kinda went through that,
Mhm.
kinda a bit, like, the end is this very, like, kinda reconstruction piece where you're talking about mystery and, like, it's okay to not have all of the answers, and I'm
Yeah.
gonna choose trust even without all of that. In the
Yeah.
middle of it is this, like, we're going to, like, work through, I can't pray anymore,
Ooh,
uh,
yeah.
and even in the midst of that, like, I'm gonna, like, take you through some, like, mantras to, like, accept the uncertainty of things, and so, like
Right.
yeah. Anyways, it is
That's
that
perfect.
lovely.
You have graduated to I am able to interview musicians. You are exactly right, and I feel seen. I think you said that so well. So you have nothing to fear. I think too, I wanted to say, and I want to respond to what you said about my album, but also you were a pastor for a long time. You wrote sermons, right?
Yeah.
So I mean that delivery, I think that I mean, we're all coming at it with different materials, but the setup or the point that we drive home and then like how will we reflect. I think those same bones go into great writing, even if it's fictional, even if it's story, great music, great, a painting. I just think when we're expressing ourselves with what we have, I think that sermons can be art. Um, then you I think that you're probably just like transferring what you know about creating something for people to hear it. That was exactly how I wanted my flow to be for the album. Kind of explaining my beginning, moving through the middle, and then coming out to the other side. So I'm glad that that came through too.
Yeah.
That people are grasping that as well.
Okay.
Definitely.
Well, I appreciated that flow, and I'd never really I appreciated also, like, trying to pay attention to, like, oh, is, like, she doing something in the way that she's putting the album together, and so I
Mhm.
appreciate, like, the thoughtfulness that was there. Um, yeah, and so in your first song, the way that you started all off is the song that's the title track of your album, right? "Belief is Hard,"
Yeah. Yeah.
and the lyrics that I would hear in it over and over, like, that kept, like, coming back to me were the, like, "Love is beautiful but scary. Belief is hard but necessary." Do you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that a lot of people who probably listen to this podcast, or who think like you and I, as different as we all may be, find ourselves still believing and still here, which can sometimes be maddening. Plenty of people have walked away. Why am I staying? And I do feel the necessity of faith in my life. I just feel it. I feel it so deeply. I don't know if it's in the tapestry of my family. I grew up in a music making household that is very Christian, and that's part of my culture. I don't know. I just know that I need it. And kind of in the same way that we need love, and not generally, but more like with a partner. Some of the songs in the pre-chorus of that song, I say, "Why would I bring myself to pray if I can't even find faith? Why would I give myself away if we all just die someday?" That second line is about marriage.
Hmm,
Like, why would we give ourselves to another person if we're going to die and like go through that pain? And it's like, because love, because I think like we're here to love one another and like experience that, even if we can reckon with the reality that we will lose each other one day. And I guess I was sort of like meshing those together a little bit. Like there's belief and geez, who would want to keep it if you can't even pray to God sometimes? But it's like because belief is so empowering, it infuses you with hope, it gives you purpose, right? And then on the other hand, geez, who would want to get married and fall in love if that person's just gonna like suddenly die at any point? I was really playing with that like fear of losing control. I think belief is a loss of control, like true belief. And I think that love is a loss of control, true
hmm.
love. Um, so I was just dancing around with that idea. A lot of these songs also are just questions I really never answer myself.
Yeah. No, I felt like I noticed that as well. Which, like, showed up, another one that was like, all your songs were really interesting to me, but, there's a few that, like, lines kept coming up and, your song "Running From Me" I
Mhm.
thought was kinda interesting, be interesting to hear you chat a little bit about, like, what the origin of that was and what you were getting at through that song.
When I try to find myself, don't know where to start. It's like she wants to hide. There's no one there. What if she's scared? I keep on running, running, running from me. I keep on running, running from me. I keep on running, running, running from me. I keep on running, running from me. Can't make her stay.
I'm so glad you asked. No one has asked me about that one.
Yeah?
Like,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, it's like so disco. I wish that Stranger Things would pick it up for their season. I just feel like it's giving ABBA, right? It's like a groove. Um, but that song actually, is one of the songs that it's not a negative thing, but I have sad feelings about the message of that song because I've realized that I grew up so devout and my parents didn't force me to be devout. I chose like, you know, another brief moment of background for context. I grew up in a divorced home, but my parents were both like absolutely strong Christians and people of faith. And they took me and my sister to the same church like forever that my whole family led worship in, that Lindsay, my sister, and I eventually led worship in, that I began working in. And it was youth camp and it was Bible Bowl. That was where we memorized scriptures and got trophies.
Mm.
And it was, you know, like if you're afraid, pray and Veggie Tales. And the one cool thing about me is I think because I was raised by single parents every other week, we got to watch movies that weren't so Christian and listen to music that wasn't so Christian. So that was like my one like dip into like the secular world. I went to a private school, um, a Christian school. What I'm saying is I didn't really, I mean, up until my 20s and then I'm working in church, I really didn't have a big idea of what kind of books I liked to read because I read Joyce Meyer, because I read
Okay.
like Brian Houston's book on how to start a big church because I was listening, you know, I wasn't watching movies that were disturbing or upsetting to me. I was just like keeping it breezy and fun with the rom-com. So, um as I began to deconstruct, I was like, I want to read Harry Potter. Like I wasn't allowed to read Harry Potter,
Okay, sure.
right? And like again, these rules weren't enforced, but if my parents say it has witchcraft in it, I'm like, then I'm not going to read that, you know? And so here I am. I'm 33. I mean, I wrote that song several years ago, but I'm almost finished with the Harry Potter series. The book's on my nightstand. But I mean, if I'm being really vulnerable and transparent, I've been trying to figure out, you know, what do I like to read that isn't connected to anything spiritual at all? How do I like to spend my time? I was so busy with church functions for so much of my life. Again, I'm really cautious here, not because my parents forced me. It was because it was my community, it was my tribe. My friends were there. I was on the worship team. I loved music. You know, we all stayed out of trouble and we had sleepovers and like, you know, we did church camp together. In so many ways, that community was incredibly helpful, protecting, nurturing. Again, I've learned to accept it in my reconstruction. But here I am wondering, what do I like to read? What do I always knew what kind of music I like to listen to, but hobbies and what kind of person am I when I'm not always wondering if I'm righteous or not? Like what makes me mad when I allow myself to be mad instead of thinking that anger is a sin or something? So I wrote this song like I think I'm afraid to get to know myself because I'm afraid of what I'll find.
Yep.
And I think that I think I'm afraid that I don't know myself. So it just round and round we go, which you can kind of hear in the song as well. There was something that I wanted to mention to you about also something cool that musicians have been doing since forever. Is this is this tactic called text painting where you make a song sound like the ideas that you're presenting. And running is pretty cyclical. You just hear me saying that over and over. And I sort of wrote it that way because that's all I kept doing for a long time was running from myself. And I wanted that to come through.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the roundabout way of me sharing that song with you. But it felt really good to get out of my insides to say, like, I can't believe I don't know who I am. And then almost felt like an exercising moment for me, like there's
Yeah.
nothing demonic or weird, just like, wow, I'm glad I finally admitted that to myself. And once that song was written and demoed, even before we produced it, I was like, I'm gonna start reading Harry Potter. I'm
Hmm.
gonna pick up some new shows and like mess around with how I spend my time. And I've had a few friends raised like me come to me and say, I didn't know that's what that song was about, but I feel the same way. So I imagine it's fairly common when you're really devout in your
Yeah.
beliefs. Just
Yeah.
from the time there, that's kind of becomes your thing.
Yeah. I love that reading Harry Potter is like your bad girl rebellion. It's like
You know, what all of the
like,
things.
I'm gonna throw out everything I used to believe, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna read the most popular young adult fiction book that's been written in the last 30 years.
I know. Dude, I know. It makes me laugh so hard because I mean, so many people would be like, okay, good for you. You really could have gone further with it. I do think, though, in a way, it's also sort of, it is juvenile, isn't it? It's kind of like, whoa, I wonder if there's a part of me in there that's like 14 that wants to read those books, you know?
Sure. Yeah, I think that that's really interesting. I mean, well, I was thinking a couple of things as you were sharing. One is I appreciate a lot of times when we are talking about sort of this sort of faith journey and really like a journey where our faith is evolving and becoming more expansive. A lot of times the conversation gets caught up in a more heady conversation about like which kind of, shifting theologies, and we're going to work through those theologies or whatever, right? Um, but there's also this very real part that gets missed by some folks that you're keying in on in that song of like, I am changing as a person, and my identity has been wrapped up in a certain kind of way, especially when you have been raised in certain kind of church communities, and especially when like your life has revolved around. It's not just that your life revolved around faith; it's that your life revolved around faith through a certain lens and through
Yes.
a certain kind of community and like all of that sort of stuff, and that the idea of like also this is like figuring out who I am, and without all of those constructs I'm not fully sure who I am anymore. Like that, I just felt like that there's so much resonance in that.
That's exactly right. That's a great way to put it. Once you remove all of those, what's left, you know?
Ye Yeah. Yeah. And I love that idea too of, I mean, there's probably for some folks, depending on like, I mean, I think everybody's journey is different, but if you are in religious communities that are a bit more maybe controlling or repressive, or ones that maybe are more stricter, a bit more fundamentalist leaning, that have more rules around what you can and can't do, there
Mhm.
are parts of us that become delayed in some ways, that we experience some arrested development. And so there is this like kind of returning to some things from our younger selves. I have several friends that will often talk about like the need to be reparenting themselves,
Yes.
and like going back the experience of the younger selves, the things that their younger selves missed, right? In the kind of
Yes.
communities that they were raised in.
Right. Yeah, I feel that so deeply. I feel even this album has been a huge labor of love, and most people know because I try to make it part of my shtick because it is unusual. I'm a teacher by day. I'm a passionate musician. I have summers off, and that's when I make my music,
Hmm.
or weekends. But um, as a teacher, oh no, I just lost my train of thought. Oh, wait, you said um, reparenting.
Yeah.
Oh, what I'm saying is the teacher bit is just to say, I don't need money through music. I have a job that I love. Um, I love to create music and I love the community that I'm part of. So this has been super hard. Making an album is so hard. It is so expensive. I fundraised for some of it with my community here that just believed in the project, but it felt like parenting myself a little because my parents always believed in our musical abilities, but we chose to use those musical abilities like exclusively for the church. And I was really taught that doing that is the most beautiful and holy thing that you can do. And so actually, I'm sure you'll find this interesting. Once I began deconstructing, I didn't know if I believed that anymore. And then I was pretty blocked for like 2 years. I just couldn't write anything because I thought I was only supposed to be writing like worship songs.
Yes.
And so allowing myself to make this album was sort of like a maternal version of myself coming in and saying, just create, like, just make it and put it out because it's fun to make things and things can be beautiful when they're art and it'll help people. And, all of that talent was used for so long for one institution, and that's okay. I can accept that, but this was sort of like free for all. This was like that wild era that I never really reckoned with.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's this recognition that like a lot of us had to learn that there are things that can be beautiful just for the sake of beauty, because beauty is good in and of itself. And it doesn't have to be pragmatic. It doesn't have to serve an evangelistic purpose. It doesn't have to be create music that's created for the sake of worship. It can be music that's created for the sake of beauty, for self-expression, and like, so I love like even that's so. Uh, I don't. I'm trying to figure out how to express this. That there's like these like meta layers going on in your album, right? That it's like Y the way that you're writing it and what you are going through for yourself just in creating the album is saying something about the album itself as well.
Yes. Yes. And it all just it's like, what does Richard Rohr call it? The Trinitarian dance. I'm
Yeah.
sure others have coined it as that. It's all just sort of connecting and pulling back and touching for a second and it's strange how art does that. I certainly didn't design it that way, but I do think that art can also be very holy. And I think once God gets hold of stuff, it's just kind of like, wow,
Yeah.
multidimensional,
Okay. All right, so then I wanna move to the end of your album. So at the
Yeah.
beginning, you start with belief being hard, that here's
Yeah.
this thing that's hard, but like it's you were saying it's like woven into the fabric of my being and I don't know how to do without it.
Yes.
I can't give it up. In the middle, you kinda end up in some places that are, like, through some struggle and, like, what do I do with this? What do I do with myself? What do I do with these different aspects of my faith? And then in the end, you move towards this place of, like, creating space for mystery, and so you end with "Mysterious Now." Would you Yeah, share a little bit about that song?
Everything is so mysterious now. Darkness lied to you, but can I learn how to trust again? Everything is so mysterious now. Everything is so mysterious now.
I wrote the song on the piano and it felt like my
Everything is so mysterious
it felt like
now.
if there were any worship song on the album, that would be it. And remember, I was raised like on a steady diet of worship, and my whole family, like this is the family trait, is music and worship leading. And I sort of let all that go. But this song really crept up one day on the piano, and I felt like I was talking right to God, which is an old feeling, an old home that I don't often return to,
Hmm.
after deconstructing and reconstructing. It just looks different now. So it was so special. It was like my precious little, and when I recorded the demo, it felt a little bit not jazzy, but just it's me and the piano, and I was really singing my heart out. And something interesting happens when you create music with others. David Gunger is my producer and a dear friend, like truly New York family. And he gets hold of the song and he's a huge fan of Radiohead. So there's your dead giveaway and kind of thought, I think this song should be creepy. And I was like, creepy? Not creepy. But we kind of talked through it. And the more that I thought that he was pulling out, we had some other bandmates with us and we were pulling out different instruments, often different like pads and like synthesizers to sort of create that deep, there's this almost groaning kind of creepy hit of these different um, synthesizers, these different keyboards that we were playing with. And I was like, oh, yeah, it's sort of outer spacey. It's sort of like, I don't know. I don't know God, but I know God, which I know is, it's not enough words, but it just felt like the right fit. It felt like text painting,
Hmm.
like the unknown, the deepest part of the ocean and outer space are both terrifying and like devastatingly beautiful, which I think is probably a great way to try and conceptualize God, like the I am. And even though I'm like floating around at the bottom of the ocean or around in space, believing in God and everything's mysterious, there's still a sense of trust after everything. Uh, and again, no answers to my questions. The lyrics are how far does love reach? How deep does love go? Um, are you still with me or can't be sure you're with me? Am I lost and alone? Are you still here? I don't answer those questions. I just say everything's mysterious now and I still trust you. Can I learn to trust you? And then at the end of the song, I say, yeah, actually, it's crazy, but I still trust you. So the way the song came together, I really appreciated David's ears for that. Like, how
Yeah.
do we encapsulate the unknown? Again, creepy is a poor use of the word, but like, can we bring in some sounds that are unusual, that are almost extraterrestrial? Because sometimes that's what it feels like, operating with the divine, working with the mystical and the unknown.
Yeah.
Um, so that's my hidden gem on the album. I didn't release it as a single beforehand, but all of the other songs came out as singles. And it's special to talk about it with you because people just were able to hear that one on all streaming platforms as of Sunday. So it's like very new in the world. Thank you for asking. It's my really sweet, special letter to God, really.
I love that. I love that. Well, friends, this is a great album for you to like engage in wherever you're at in your own faith journey as you're like kind of processing whether you are in the space where you're asking a lot of questions or you have asked those questions and you're sitting on the other side or wherever you're kind of finding yourself in all of that. I think that this is a great album to engage you in different kinds of senses to like to think about your faith journey beyond just something that you're thinking about, but that you're engaging in like acts of beauty as well. So the album is Belief is Hard.
Mhm.
Uh, Jayne Sugg, Jayne
That's right.
Sugg.
Yep.
Um, and then where do folks find you on the internet if they want to be paying attention to what you're doing?
Oh, yeah. You can find me on Instagram at CJane, like the old books, CJane Run, CJane Jump.
Oh, that's good.
That's
Clever.
SEE, yeah, C, and then Jane, Jayne. You could also just search my name, my artist name. You can Google me. I have a website, JayneSugg.com. I'm available everywhere. Music can be streamed, YouTube, Apple Music, Spotify. I'm also on TikTok. That's mostly for pleasure because that is a good time. My what's the word? My feed is just people falling. So that's a self-inflicted joy that I have. I know there are two kinds of people in the world. I'm the kind that thinks it's funny when people fall, but I hope that doesn't make you judge me in any poor light, Mike, because I really am. I mean well within.
I love it. I love it.
That's where you can find me.
Well, Jayne, this has been such a gift. This album is such a gift, and
Thank
you're
you.
a gift. I'm really grateful that we got some time to hang out today.
Thanks, Mike. Me too. Thanks for having me.